5 terrible Formula 1 cars that scored points. First up, Marusha MR03 Ferrari, and we're including in here as well the Manor MRT05. Marusha, Manor, Virgin, whatever the name, they sadly never had the car that was quick enough to get into the points in a normal race. Saying this, they did have some pretty special drivers pass through their ranks over the years. Glock, Wehrlein, Bianchi, to name a few. Two of the feel-good stories from 2014 to 2016, including the team's only 2 times in the points, with Bianchi in 2014 and Pascal Wehrlein in 2016. It's easy to forget that this team was operating on an insanely small budget, and the points finishes they had may have been a little bit lucky, but they needed a skilled team behind them surrounding the intelligent drivers to make it happen. Let's start with the 2014 Monaco Grand Prix. At the time, it was the home race for Jules Bianchi, as there was no French Grand Prix. Bianchi started in 19th position ahead of both Caterhams and was ahead of his teammate by over half a second in qualifying. He had a steady race and did well to avoid the typical Monaco carnage, even though he did make contact with Jean-Eric Vergne. He steadily worked his way up the order, including an impressive move on Kamui Kobayashi. Go and check it out on YouTube if you haven't already. He finished 8th place on the road but had a 5-second time penalty which dropped him down to 9th. It was a special drive, and this was noted by one of the best names in the sport. Fernando Alonso said, "I'm extremely happy for him, very proud for what this result will mean for his career. I have no doubts it will be a good career, but hopefully with this result you can have a more competitive car next year and show his talents even more." With the incredibly sad passing of Jules Bianchi in 2015, this is one of the memories we can all cherish from his Formula 1 career that was sadly only seen through one of the slowest cars on the grid. Many said that this race was as good as a win for the team, and fans to this day still talk about the special race. Thank you Jules, you'll be remembered forever. In 2016 the mood was a little different. On one hand, Manor had a slightly better car. Not quick enough for the points, but they could beat the Sauber team on pure pace at some circuits. On the other hand, the team were in deep financial issues, and with the regulations changing again for 2017, they looked in trouble and likely to never race again. Pascal Wehrlein was racing alongside Indonesian Rio Haryanto, both of which were struggling in the 2016 car, even though it did have some pace. It has to be said though, Pascal was the driver who managed to overcome its issues and put the car in contention for points when it mattered most. The 2016 Austrian Grand Prix may not be remembered for his 10th place, may be better remembered for the last lap crash between a certain 2 silver cars. Nonetheless, on the last lap of the race, Pascal Wehrlein was in 11th position and set to still secure his best result for the team. However, it got even better when Sergio Perez had an incident on the last lap of the race, promoting the Manor driver into the points. It was a huge moment for the Mercedes Junior and DTM champion, as he proved to everyone in Formula 1 that he was good enough for the top tier of world motorsport and deserving of a much better car. The same can be said of course for Jules Bianchi. I'm sad that neither of these drivers could fulfill a successful career in Formula 1, even though of course they're very different situations. I feel like Mercedes treated the Pascal situation in a less than optimal way. In my opinion, he's still more than good enough for Formula 1. Especially when you see how quick he's been throughout a number of categories through his career. Lotus 43. Terrible car? Well, maybe. Terrible reliability? Most definitely. The Lotus 43 only finished 1 race in its time in Formula 1. The car was driven by Jim Clark, Graham Hill and Peter Arundel between 1966 and 1967. The Lotus 43 was somewhat based on the Lotus 38, which was an Indy car due to Chapman's experience at the Indy with the larger engine capacity and tyre suspension setup. The car was designed in this way due to the new regulations that came in force in 1966, which enforced engine capacities up to 3 litres. It also had better tyres which are able to handle the larger engines. It also had an updated design as well, which was essential. Colin Chapman had made a deal of the use of the BRM P75 H16 engine. The P75 was supposedly technically advanced and powerful, but this would not prove to be the case in reality. The engine proved to be overweight, unreliable, and was unable to produce the intended power. The car was supposed to debut at the 1966 Monaco Grand Prix, however its first event was the following Grand Prix in Belgium, but during practice the engine gave way and the day was over. The Lotus 43 returned at the Italian Grand Prix but retired with a gearbox failure. Clark then surprisingly won the United States Grand Prix at Watkins Glen, the only race win for the P75 engine, and surprisingly they were using a spare engine loaned to them by the BRM team. This win would actually be the only finish for the Lotus 43 over its use in Formula 1. The car was succeeded by the famous Lotus 49, which still took the team to second place in the team standings in 1967, even though they had started the year with the Lotus 43. The 49 would win 2 of the 4 Constructors' Championships that it raced in, take 12 of the 42 race victories, and also take Graham Hill and Jochen Rindt to the Drivers' Championship in 1968 and 1970 respectively, a far more successful attempt of a Formula 1 car then. Minardi Asia Tech PS02. Minardi were always a fan favourite in the world of Formula 1 thanks to the team's attempt of making it into the midfield, even though they were massively underfunded. The Minardi PS02 was used in the 2002 Formula 1 season. It scored 2 points, both of which were Australia, with rookie Mark Webber finishing in 5th place. Ironically, it would be the second best result for Mark Webber in Australia, even though he drove championship winning Red Bulls and a somewhat competitive Williams. He'd only beat it in 2012 when it finished 4th. The PS02 however scored no more points that season. Webber was partnered by Alex Young, who failed to qualify for 3 of the races that season and was actually replaced by Anthony Davidson in Hungary and Belgium. The PS02 used aerodynamics designed by Loic Bigois, who had been drafted in from the now defunct Prost team. However, a manufacturing error caused the front wing to fail, and this stylized the team from the Spanish Grand Prix. This car was the first and last Minardi engine to be powered by an Asia Tech engine, and also it was using the Michelin tyres a year before they switched to the Bridgestones. Asia Tech had powered Arrows to a points finish in 2001, but they were still generally seen as a bottom of the grid engine. Minardi struggled for finance throughout this season, and it looked like they would go under on a number of occasions. Paul Stoddart attempted to bring in cash through numerous people, and they were lucky to finish the season. However, the Minardi team would go on to race for a few more seasons, their last of which would be in 2005. And between 2003 and 2005 they would score 8 more points, 7 of which were in the infamous 2005 United States Grand Prix. However, the Formula 1 grid can be thankful of Minardi's existence. They brought in such names as Alonso, Webber, Trulli, Fisichella. Of course, they still exist in Formula 1 nowadays as AlphaTauri, and when you look at the wider picture, they've had a good amount of success under Red Bull ownership. The Spyker F8 VII. An important car for me, as it's the one that gave my man Adrian Sutil his first appearance in Formula 1, after finishing runner-up to Lewis Hamilton in European Formula 3 and winning the Japanese F3 Championship. The F8 VII was described by the team as a solid base on which to build, as they had a very small amount of time to produce a car after they bought out Midland in mid-2006. The engine of the Spyker F8 VII was a Ferrari 056, which was actually a 2006 specification engine which they had to use due to cost reasons. However hard they tried, this car was not competitive and they only scored 1 point. But this car is probably best remembered for one race, when Markus Winkelhoek started last at the European Grand Prix in the Nürburgring. However, due to superior tactics from the Wiz team at Spyker, Markus Winkelhoek saw himself in the lead of the race by 33 seconds after just a couple of laps after most of the cars had pitted or spun off in the terrible conditions. The race was eventually stopped due to a little bit of rain. Winkelhoek officially led this race for 7 laps, but as the conditions improved on the restart, he slid down the field and eventually retired from the race after just 15 laps. Still a big legend in that race, however. Spyker were still putting money into the team, however. There was a B specification car that was launched halfway through the year. However, there were many delays and the B car eventually debuted at the Italian Grand Prix. The car had actually failed the FIA crash testing program a few times before that. German icon Adrian Sutil then scored Spyker's one and only point in Formula 1 at the Japanese Grand Prix at the wheel of the B-Spec car. Interestingly, this car would only be slightly modified when sold to Force India for their 2008 season. So if we look at Force India in 2008, which was essentially the same car, it it would be a 2006 car with a 2007 Ferrari engine. Unsurprisingly, they didn't score any points. However, Sutil should have scored some points in Monaco until a certain Ferrari driver rear-ended him and destroyed his car. At least Spyker scored a point in their single season in Formula 1. Not too many teams can say that only lasted 1 year. Finally, another underdog story, the Jordan EJ13 Ford Cosworth. The car was designed by Gary Anderson and also was helped by Nicola Petrucci and was driven by Fisichella, Furman and Baumgartner, who had to replace Furman for a couple of races. Even though this was a 2003 car, Jordan had to make do with a 2002 spec Cosworth engine, which was badged up as a Ford RS1. And then the season was definitely not seen as a success. They didn't finish last place in the Constructors' Championship, they did beat Minardi. They still won a race in 2003, which is quite surprising considering this was possibly one of the worst cars in Formula 1 history. Of course, this win came under crazy circumstances in the 2003 Brazilian Grand Prix, which took place in some of the worst conditions Formula 1 has ever raced under. There was a massive incident on the start-finish straight and the race was unsurprisingly red flag and stopped. However, there was some confusion post-race. Fisichella thought he had won it, but then a really big shake-up before the podium ceremony saw Kimi Raikkonen stand on the top step of the podium. Still, in this car, second place would have been amazing for Fisichella, but it didn't end there. It was not until the next race in Imola where Fisichella would be handed the winner's trophy after the FIA inquiry saw him as the eventual race winner. To put this into perspective, Fisichella would end up finishing 15th place at the following San Marino Grand Prix. I'm not sure there's ever been such a big fall from grace. However, the car did seem to improve slightly over the season and they had surprisingly good reliability considering the old parts they were running. They actually scored on 2 more occasions in the United States and at the Spanish Grand Prix. Possibly they could have made it onto this list without the special win, but of course that win is what drew me to this story. Jordan would score 17 more points in Formula 1, 11 of which were at the United States Grand Prix in 2005 where Montero got a podium, before they sold to Midland for the 2006 season. This is now the team that's Racing Point and set to become Aston Martin in 2021. What an incredible story. So that's it for this video. 5 interesting stories about 5 pretty terrible cars that somehow scored points. Now of course there are more cars that scored points that were terrible and I'd be interested to hear your stories in the comment section below. Thank you for tuning in once again. I'm sorry that the Formula 1 videos have been a little bit sparse over the last couple of months. It's been super hectic at work with of course Formula 1 starting, so many triple headers, some of my own motorsport I'm doing as well. It's meant I've not really had a weekend off in a long time. But nonetheless, I'm looking forward to producing more videos, so I'll see you all soon. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great day. It's been Alex Mad here. Goodbye.